Welcome back. All right, so I'm going to talk about my other fun little creation that started in the 80s. So I've talked before on the Hockey Channel about how I created my own hockey league, created my own players, and simulated results and all that. And the Rangers ended up winning a bunch of Stanley Cups because, sure, even though I created the league, Vancouver didn't win every year. Boston didn't win every year. Dallas didn't win every year. In fact, Rangers won a lot, but that was just because of how the league was created. And again, I wanted to be fair. I wanted to be fair. Now with wrestling, I didn't have to be as fair. I didn't, but I still mostly was. So the CWA started out as the UWF, which was the Underground Wrestling Federation. I was like, it's kind of dark sounding. So I changed it to Championship Wrestling Association, not knowing at the time that there was already a CWA in the real world and all that. So eventually I had to change the name again. But that was the one I knew of mostly. And it ran basically from 1985 through 1996. And then I kind of lost interest and stopped worrying about it because in my early 20s, and I don't know, I felt like it was kind of goofy. And then eFeds. I discovered eFeds. The interesting thing is eFeds started out around 1994, 1993, around then, which is you create your own wrestler, you put them onto this roster where somebody else is deciding the results, somebody else is writing the event, and you cut a promo against your opponent, they cut a promo against you. You might have three promos back and forth or four during the week, and then you have usually it was voting based. So you'd have voters that would decide who won. The vote wouldn't be public, so you wouldn't know who won until the event went live. But I ran my own. I ran my own right away when I heard that. I was like, I can do that. So I would write on weekends. Sometimes I would write events. It might take me 17 or 18 hours of writing at the computer. I peck and hunt, so it was fun. Never learned the proper typing. I peck and hunt. I was pretty fast at it though. There were jokes in my old office jobs about how fast I was at peck and hunt. But at any rate, I slid right into the whole eFed world relatively easily because I'd been creating wrestlers for a long time. And so the characters that I was bringing into this eFed experience were guys that I'd created in the 80s. And so I already had a really good idea of their personality, their backgrounds, and everything, because there were always storylines going on with wrestlers. Now, when it started out, I was very much borrowing from WWF, now, of course, WWE. I was very much borrowing from the NWA, which became WCW, as well as split off with the NWA as well, but that's a whole other story. But I borrowed, and so I created my own Four Horsemen, which was myself, because of course I'm going to have myself. Why wouldn't I have myself in there? Bruce Miller, who was one that I created as I go, okay, this is my best friend. Greg Anderson, Steve Lang joining up after. And the way that it worked was that, my character was not necessarily the Ric Flair because I didn't have like the flamboyant. I always envisioned my wrestlers being really hardworking and one that was seen as, because I was the owner of the company, having the silver spoon in my mouth, and I was like, nope, that's not how this works. But Bruce Miller and Shannon's Gaines were a tag team, and then eventually Greg Anderson and Steve Lang were my Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. Flashier though, they were known as the Sensational Ones, and so eventually, actually they started out as the New Sensation, which was also their theme song from NXS. Bruce Miller's, eventually his song became The Memory Remains by Metallica. My song changed a lot. It started out as Burning Heart from Rocky 4, because why not Rocky 4? And eventually, towards the end, when I was running an eFed, it became The Hand That Feeds by Nine Inch Nails. I thought that one worked. And before that, I'd used Deep by Nine Inch Nails. I'd also used Into the Void by Nine Inch Nails, too. So I went through a Nine Inch Nails phase, but and to this day, if I brought all this back, my character would still use The Hand That Feeds by Nine Inch Nails because it perfectly, because he's the boss of the company. I thought that one works. Charles Grogan, Charlie McAdam, Jerry Thompson were added later, and so the way that it worked was eventually my character became world champion, but not right away. I felt like that was kind of a little much. So he's Intercontinental Champion to start. Remember, I did borrow a lot from WWF. And Intercontinental Champion, fighting for that belt for a long time and keeping it for some time. And I think it was 1987 before I actually said, okay, I'll have my character go for the world title, and won it. So I created it in 1984. 84 as the UWF. It became CWA in 85. So it was about 2 years that I held off before I said, all right, well, I'll go for the world title. And then Miller became the Intercontinental Champion. And again, Anderson and Lang had the tag belts. Charles Grogan, I think it was the Eurasian title. Yeah, I didn't have a European title. I had the Eurasian title. I thought that sounded better because Europe and Asia, big continent and all that. McAdam, I don't remember what title I had him win. I didn't have a cruiserweight belt. Thompson eventually would win the Intercontinental title when Miller would move on to become world champion. But then things get a little bit dicey. And eventually, the Sensational Seven ran its course, and members of this group would go on to form the Mafia, which was a group that I had that was led by a manager that I gave the name Tony Parisi. I always envisioned a Robert De Niro type, so when I got to the EFED world, I was like, Robert De Niro has to be the picture base for Tony Parisi. Just has to be. There's no way around it. He has to. And I didn't make it that the characters were doing anything illegal per se. There might have been some stuff on Tony that might have got him thrown in federal prison, but nobody who knew any of those items about his past were around to talk about it. So kind of crazy. And so it was kind of like they were a group that were fan favorites, sure, but if you were going to break the rules to try to beat them, good luck. But it was a group that I made sure didn't blow up. Like the NWO eventually became 30, 40 guys. The Mafia never became a group that big. I think Seven was as big as any group was in my time of writing wrestling. Now, eventually, you have to have that foil. And really, honestly, you should always have that foil. For my character, eventually became Night Dweller. However, 1987, Scavenger is born. Scavenger was a very simple wrestling concept. A wrestler who is an everyman. Think Dusty Rhodes. A guy who is basically off the street, basically has had a really hard life, and has a lot of stories to tell. And he became sort of the biggest face of the company at the time he came in. The way I envisioned it was, okay, fans would respond to this because he's an everyman, he's an underdog, and he's fighting against guys that are bigger than he is, fighting against guys who are more experienced than he is. And so when he hit, eventually, I didn't just have the CWA anymore. At its height, with the most wrestlers I'd created, it eventually became, I think I had six different that I was trying to follow. Like, okay, I've got CWA, CWF, LRWL, NAWF, WWI, and then there was one I made up too that was like, okay, this would be like a rival where I can have wrestlers come in from there, sort of like when New Japan guys come over to wrestle in AEW. I had to create basically territories. I was like, it's better if I create territories. And at its height, I think I had over 200 different wrestler names that I'd created, and characters and backstories for most of them. And the ones that didn't have backstories are your jobbers. They're the guys who lose all the time. And you had to have that. You had to have those jobbers for when guys first come in, where you're building them up. So a guy comes in like Scavenger and says, look, I'm here. I've got, all this drive and desire to be the best. And, eventually he would win a title. But because I felt like the CWA was filled at the top, I had Scavenger over in the, I think it was NAWF, fighting with the Warrior. I know. I don't have the Warrior on the board. I'm sorry. Because that was lazy. That was absolutely lazy by me. And there were some lazy names. They're not on the board. Because I'm kind of mildly embarrassed by that. But Scavenger was a character I created in 1987 that when the whole EFED thing became known to me in the early 2000s, I really, jumped into it. Scavenger was the one I used. I was like, I'm using him. He's the guy. Scavenger's the guy. And eventually I made Scavenger crazy, where he was completely over the top insane. But he was really well off from about 20 years of wrestling, so he was really eccentric. He had a steel chair he talked to. And sometimes I would do promos. So again, this is writing it out by hand, which people in the internet wrestling community would get mad. But your promos are too short. They should be like at least 3,000 words. No. No. If you need 3,000 words to tell me why you're going to beat me, you've got a really weak argument. So... And I was really good at, I would build up my opponent and talk about how good he was, and then I'd be able to finish off with saying, and sadly, this is why you're going to lose. And I was a good writer. I'd written books, so I knew I could write like a good character development. But Scavenger, eventually, I had it where the entire promo would be just the chair. And I would envision like the chair just on camera from different angles. It would be like three different cameras. And it would be like the chair is the promo. And I would get a private message from my opponent that week saying, "How the hell do I answer that? How do I answer that? It's just a chair. Nothing happened." And I'm like, "Hey, there was a bunch of text in there on what I thought the chair might be thinking in that moment." He's like, "Chairs don't think. What are you doing?" But it worked. It absolutely worked to this day. So like when Shane Spears was the chairman in AEW, I'm like, please let him hear the chair speaking. Nope, nope, they blew it. I think it can work. And eventually Scavenger had a house plant that he was pretty sure was sentient, and he would bring it to the ring and he would talk to it. Al Snow. Oh, there's definitely some Al Snow Scavenger crossover. Although the chair thing to me was quite different from Al Snow because he kept it for years. At times he would play it off that like, I know the chair's not actually talking to me, dude. I'm not crazy. And then he would go right back into, "Oh no, it is talking to me. I was before I was just kidding. Yeah, the chair's better than you." He would try to tag the chair in like it was something, but it did make it tough for people to fight against him. My favorite tag team I ever created, which I never used in this environment but for EFED, was the Schmelke brothers. Based on the Mulkey brothers, absolutely. They were 105 pounds each. They were albino. I pictured them as having really long, stringy blonde hair. And they were terrible. They were, like I said, about 100 pounds each. When you were filling out a form to join an EFED, they go, "What's their finisher?" And I would say usually the opening bell. The bell rings and it just throws them off. Sometimes I would have, if I wrote a match with them, where one would tag the other and the guy would trip over the rope getting into the ring and knock himself out. So, and I would get complaints about that, like, how can you do? Oh, and they were managed by Adam West in a Batman costume. So I really, man, there were people who hated fighting them because be like, how do I cut a promo against this? They got Adam West. They can't lift a table. I had an entire promo of 500 words or 600 words, and all it was them trying to lift a table. It's just that standard table you see in a wrestling match, and they couldn't lift it. And it was a table match they were in. So and that was the promo I cut. They won the match because of the way because my writing was better than the writing of the person I was against. The guy who runs the EFED's like, "Great, your promo was way better than theirs. How do I write this crap? How do I have them win?" And I said, "You can't." My answer to that was, I said, "You can't. They can't win. It goes against their gimmick. Their gimmick is they suck. They're 100 pounds each, and they're awful." Eventually, one of them took so many knocks to the head, he became pretty sure he was the greatest rapper in the history of the world. And it was before J-Rock. And when I saw J-Rock on Trailer Park Boys, I'm like, great, he stole my gimmick. All right, he stole my gimmick. Great. Cool. Because, like, an albino with stringy hair that's 100 pounds and 5 foot even in terms of height, as a rapper, I thought it was the funniest thing. I thought it was absolutely funny. And everything started with "yo." Hey, yo, yo. And I'm not talking like, hey, yo, like Razor Ramon Cool. Just yo, 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 what up? Because I really, at that point in time, wasn't a fan of some of the rappers that were out there. Some may say Vanilla Ice, and they'd be right. But, and that was kind of what I fashioned after. Like, this is a really skinny, scrawny little Vanilla Ice wannabe. And, again, then J-Rock showed up. So I'm like, all right, well, there you go. So, but the Schmelke brothers aside, and if you're going to create a wrestler for your WWE game, I would recommend the Schmelke brothers. Their strength is 0. They're 5 foot tall. Their entrance music was the song from Butthole Surfers from the Beavis and Butthead movie. I think it was the one from the Beavis and from the Crow. The second Crow movie. I think there's a Butthole Surfer. It was a song that just it sounded weird and kind of it had weird chanting in it. And I'm like, yeah, it works. That works for the Schmelkies. But getting back to my wrestling thing here, Night Dweller. So Scavenger became this hero, right? He became sort of like Sting. Put it that way, like Sting for my company. Didn't have face paint, didn't do any of that. But eventually you need a foil. And so the foil for Scavenger would change, but eventually Night Dweller comes in. Night Dweller, I had cut promos for 4 months before his debut. 4 months building him up. 4 months of who is this person? Why is he cutting promos? And all Night Dweller wanted was a match against Scavenger. He was saying, if I'm going to debut in this company, I'm not facing jobbers. I'm not facing the lower level guys. I want Scavenger. If I'm going to prove that I'm going to be the next guy, I have to beat him. And Scavenger's like, fine, you know where to find me. Scavenger never turned down a fight. Never. That was his character. That was his arc was, I don't turn down a fight. I fight everybody. So you want to fight, I'm there. So Night Dweller beat him. And the way that I did it too is Night Dweller beat him clean. So after Night Dweller beat Scavenger clean and made it look relatively easy, I had Scavenger take off for a while. I had Scavenger out for, I think it was 6 months before I brought Scavenger back. And this is just an angle. It's not that he's hurt. It's just an angle. And then when Scavenger came back, he wanted his revenge on Night Dweller, which he didn't get in the next match. He didn't get in the third match either. I think it was 4 tries before he finally beat Night Dweller. And it was an absolute drag out in a cage. Because the way that I wrote it was, I didn't have like, I mean, eventually I had the complicated matches, but I felt like the steel cage match should end the feud. It felt like at that time in wrestling, in WWF or NWA, the steel cage match usually ended the feud. So that these guys go back and forth and be like, all right, we're going to the cage. And that was one of the things with my character as well, was he never lost in a cage match. My character would lose anywhere, not in a cage. And so it would get to the point where the heels, the bad guys, would be like, I'm not fighting him in a cage. I won't do it. And my answer would be, if you want my title after everything we've been through, you're going to have to fight me in a cage. So that was the whole plot line there. Now, Blair Drake eventually became the foil for my character, because you have to have a foil for each character. This is part of why I think WWE right now has a program that's more watchable than AEW. You have these everybody's all interconnected, but you have certain wrestlers that are foils for other wrestlers who are, diametrically opposed to one another in all their characterizations and everything, and it just works when they wrestle each other. And the important thing too is to keep them apart for a while. At least I felt that way. I still do. When I was writing the E-Fed, the CWA, I would keep guys apart. And I would message somebody and go, look, your character right now is on this arc. I'm going to put you into a feud with this guy. So message him, go over how you guys want to do this. It's going to start with backstage stuff. It's going to start with small stuff. And eventually we're going to build it up to the point where you guys are so PO'd at each other, you've got to have a fight. So we're going to do this. You're going to have other matches between now and then, but we're building to that. And so usually I made sure that the guys I had in my E-Fed got along with one another. If somebody didn't get along with the others, they didn't last. They just didn't. They wouldn't accept losses. They'd be like, I'm so much better than that. I'm so much better. And I'm like, okay, dude, we're pretending we're wrestlers on the internet. Tone it down a little bit because we all look ridiculous. Secondly, you're not. So tone that down as well. Because in the beginning, I was told my Fed wasn't going to last. It wasn't good enough. My graphics weren't good enough. So I got really good at Photoshop and all the other shops and print shop and paint, whatever. And eventually the graphics on the site got a lot better. My writing, I thought, was always good. And I felt like eventually people warmed up to it. So, I thought the E-Fed did well. And eventually it was the number 1 ranked E-Fed on a couple of different hubs that we had for the Feds at the time. So the idea of people knowing who I am on the internet, it started out with wrestling. But Blair Drake was the absolute best foil I ever created for myself, in that he was this smarmy know-it-all. And I decided, you know what? He should win. He should absolutely get one over on me. So eventually what I did was I had a triple threat match in a cage where it was my character, Bruce Miller, and Blair Drake. Well, Miller and I had been tag partners for on and off 10 years at that point. And I decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have Blair Drake in a cage in a triple threat match, turn myself and my best friend against one another, have us start fighting with each other, and then he's going to sneak the pin on Bruce to take my title from me. So that's what happened. And so after that, my character blamed Bruce for losing his cool and for letting Blair get in there. Bruce blamed me for the fact that Blair pinned him after I smacked him down. So it worked. It absolutely worked. So then we had this three-way feud going on, and I honestly really enjoyed that bit of writing I was doing, where once a week I'd be like, okay, what's the next logical step for this feud to take? And I understand too that because I never had to worry about wrestlers getting hurt, I never had to worry about wrestlers signing with other companies, and they're just all made up characters. Way easier for me to do long term booking and storylines than it is in a real wrestling company. Now, I wanted to mention the Pretty Boys, one of my favorite tag teams I ever created. I had this idea that, you know what, these guys are going to be beautiful men, long blonde hair, and they're going to be like, these Fabio wannabes, and they're just ladies are going to love them, and they're going to be the most fierce fighters. I decided, you know what, these guys should just be brutal in the ring. Sort of like what Stunning Steve Austin was at one point, although Stunning Steve, the whole storyline of him just being really good looking and all the ladies loving him. Like, I mean, and Steve Austin in his younger years, and some women even now, they still think he's very handsome, but I don't know how well that mixed. But I had Lovely Lorenzo, because I thought, I mean, the Lorenzo Lamas, right, was big at the time. So I was like, all right, Lovely Lorenzo, let's do that. Just a blonde-haired Lorenzo Lamas. And then Loverboy Lance Arman was added. Now, I brought them both in as singles wrestlers, and I thought, let's tag them together and call them the Pretty Boys and see what happens. And the reason they're on the board is simple, because when I watch Pretty Deadly right now in WWE, I'm like, that is exactly what the Pretty Boys were going to be. That is exactly how they were going to be. Right down to the fact that they're heels, that they're not like effeminate or anything like that. They're pretty. They're, that's their whole shtick, and it works. And fans generally don't like those egotistical types. Lorenzo himself, he had, I think, a run with the Intercontinental title. Armin never did. I never split the tag team up, though. One thing I almost never did was split up tag teams for the most part. Like Greg Anderson, Steve Lang, they were together for years. Right from 87, they won the titles the first time. That would have run right through until, I think, 89. They had the titles for 2 years that first reign. And they had a bunch of title reigns right through till about 96 when I stopped. They were just, that was their role. They were tag teams. They were a tag team. And it started out that Steve Lang was under a mask. I didn't really have a name for him. And then, the name ends up being kind of generic, which is now shared with an actor, of course. The blind guy from Don't Breathe. And Greg Anderson, I started out where he was kind of crazy. You could kind of hear voices. Yeah, there's a wrestler in WWE that eventually would do that better than Greg Anderson did, and I eventually just toned that down and went, yeah, let's get rid of the crazy stuff. But that group really worked, and that tag team stayed together for a long time. And so when Bruce and my character went through their feud, went through what they did, eventually I had it where Bruce got attacked by a wrestler and you didn't know who it was. And eventually Bruce revealed who it was. It was really anticlimactic. But I had written myself into a corner, so by the time I was going to reveal who had actually attacked Bruce, I was like, I don't think I've got a good wrestler here that it makes sense. So I had to go with one that I hadn't used in a while, and it fell flat. Bruce won that match easy, but despite everything that had gone on between Bruce and my character would come back and help him. And so that tag team was eventually put back together. But it was years. It was years between that breakup and them getting back together, which is part of how the Mafia formed. Is when they got back together, they weren't really the clean-cut faces they used to be, and they had to kind of be... It's the late 90s. Everybody had that, we got to be dark and brooding. I was doing that too. So, Cage Match ends a feud. Battle of the Warriors was my WrestleMania. It was the first Saturday of every year. First Saturday of every calendar year was Battle of the Warriors. I would start building to it in October. I would start thinking about the following Battle of the Warriors by the second weekend of January. So I was very keyed in on this. It started with Battle of the Warriors 86. I think 86 was the first year I did it. Where I had to start coming up with my own names. So I had Terror in the Isles. I had War of the Worlds, which I know is used now. I think Terror in the Isles has been used as well by another wrestling company for a pay-per-view name. And then Backdraft was one that I had too. Sunstroke was one that I used in July, obviously. But I did have various names for pay-per-views, and eventually I would just port those into my eFed. It'd be like, okay, cool. Now Battle of the Warriors has a bunch of people to pay attention. But I also did a Best Wrestler in the World tournament. So I would have all these wrestlers all throughout the year go through their machinations and their whatever. And as I said, I had all these different territories. And so I go, you know what? I'm going to take 16 wrestlers from each territory. I'm going to have a seedings that I use for each of the 16. I'm going to put together a tournament of 64, and I would get poster board and put the entire tournament onto that poster board and have 1 through 64 on that poster board on my bedroom wall. Because girls never came over, so it didn't matter. And any of my friends already knew I was weird, so that was fine. But I wrote out, here's all these wrestlers are going to be against each other. And then I would go through once a day, because in my vision, there was a house show every day. Every house show had a match of importance. Every house show had a match that would be shown on the following week's CWA broadcast, which changed names many, many times over. In the eFed, eventually became Overdrive, which was my favorite. And that was before TSN had a show called Overdrive. So, but it was Overdrive. And I used a really sweet picture of a 1967 Mustang, baby blue, for the image for that, because 67 Mustang, that's my dream car. But Battle of the Warriors was a big deal, and so was the Best Wrestler in the World tournament. So by the time you get to that final match, well, it's been 63 days. And I would time it out so that the semifinals and the finals would be at a pay-per-view. And it would be at, whichever pay-per-view was 3 months in, which normally be about Terror in the Isles. But the Best Wrestler in the World tournament, I eventually decided, let's throw that in with Battle of the Warriors. Let's have both. And so with the Fed that I was running, a couple of the different Battle of the Warriors I had, you would have 15 matches, because I'd have 16 wrestlers. And again, these are guys making up their own wrestlers. And in one night, I would have these 16 wrestlers whittled down to one. So that's what? 16, 8, 4, 2. There's 4 wrestling matches that somebody had to go through. And then I would have the normal card. So it would take place over 2 days. I'd have the tournament on the first night of the event, so it'd be 15 matches. So, bring popcorn and maybe some food, because it's going to take a while. And then the next night I would have the card, which was normally about 14 or 15 matches as well. So about 8 or 9 hours, I would think, if it was actually on television. But and that's why I modified the Best Wrestler in the World tournament down to 16. I whittled it down to 16 because the fact that I hand wrote it, and it would take me, Battle of the Warriors would usually take me, I would say, about 20 hours to write. I didn't feel like 64 wrestlers made a lot of sense or worked, and I didn't want to do that. So 16 it was. I don't remember having qualifiers either. I would just decide seedings by how, and in the eFed it could be kind of tough, because there were times that a guy's ego would be bruised. He'd be like, wait, I'm the number 5 seed and I'm fighting that guy in the first round? I should be number 3 or number 2. Okay, well, you're not, so just deal with being number 5. I don't want to be number 5. Or I'm number 16, I'm done. Normally what I would do in that 16 spot, I'd put one of my characters in there, so maybe Scavenger, because I'd be like, my characters can just lose and nobody's going to care. They're going to care if their character's out first. So my characters were basically the jobbers or the mid-carders that I would use to get the other guys over. And it was very rare that I won a title in my own eFed, which was frowned upon at the time, because of course it was. Just like me being the main guy to build around in CWA would have been frowned upon too. But yeah, I haven't done this for a very long time. I really haven't. There have been a couple of times where I've set up a message board and been like, you know what, I'm gonna start the CWA back up. It's just too time consuming. Writing an event, if it's going to be anything less than, I would say, 3 or 4 hours, what's the point? I want to make sure that people are reading this, and it's so much information. So in the description below this video, I may include a couple of the events that I wrote. In fact, I will. I'll include a couple of the events that I wrote back then that are still out there. But yeah, it is an interesting time to look back on. I understand that this doesn't make me any kind of wrestling expert on anything, but I enjoyed writing it. And in the back of my mind, I've sometimes thought, like, man, if I started writing books, I could write books on, different characters from the CWA and the climb that they went through to get there. And I actually wrote an entire book, not too long before. No, no, actually, that was quite a while ago now. Wrote a book where my character was, doing that. The whole pro wrestling thing was in there, but it was on a floppy disk, and I lost the disc. So yeah, it's gone. It's called Wonderful World. It's gone. Wonderful World's gone. But at any rate, I spent a lot of time writing that too. That was actually a fun book to write. I could try that again, but again, with my schedule with the main channel, it just, I don't think it's feasible. Someday, maybe when I cut back on my YouTube videos, if that ever happens, that kind of thing. But I think that would disappoint people if they're like, "Oh wow, THG wrote a book on fake wrestling characters, and what is this? Why would he do this?" So yeah, but maybe someday, because I do think there's a lot of interesting storylines that I had in there, and I could definitely, I think, do them better now than what I did then. I think I could write it better now than I did 20 years ago when I was writing the EFED. It's a fun thing to look at, I think. Also, I used to have what I called Rumbles before the Royal Rumble existed, where I would have the Sensational Seven against seven guys that were determined to off them and get rid of them and whatever other threats you want to put out there. And they were fun. I always envisioned it as like guys just fighting. Just they're in their regular street clothes, they're just fighting. Think like every John Moxley match. And so they go out there, they fight. There's no rules, and it's whittled down to one guy. One guy. So, or I mean, if the teams are really lopsided, maybe there's five members of the Sensational Seven still standing, or five members of the Mafia. But the Rumble was something that I would just say, this is for gang warfare, and just say, you know what, that's it. Got to have a Rumble. You guys want to do this? Fine. We'll just throw the wrestling out the window. We'll have a Rumble, and we'll see what happens. And I think that was born too out of the fact that in school there was always rumors of Rumbles. Like there'd be like, oh, that the other high school's going to come here and have a Rumble with us. And I'm like, no, they're not. That's not a thing. What are you talking about? Oh, I heard so and so from Chilliwack Senior, and they're going to come. And I'm like, no, they're not. Well, you guys are insane. So eventually, I was like, I should add that to my wrestling, because that could work in wrestling. It's not going to happen in real. And no, nobody ever came to my high school looking for a Rumble. There was always rumors that just never happened. Kind of sad thinking back now. Like, man, could have used a Rumble, sure. But yeah, so that was what I did, and then eventually the Royal Rumble was born. I was like, dang it. But there's numerous ideas I came up with that eventually ended up in real wrestling. At one point in time, when I was doing the EFED thing, I would start writing a storyline, and then WWE would have a storyline, and I had people saying, I think WWE's watching your message board. And I'm like, no, they're not. It's a coincidence. They're not watching my message board. They can come up with their own ideas. I don't think there were any WWE writers that were stealing my ideas for storylines and characters, especially since storylines in wrestling are pretty simple. You keep it simple, you make it overly complicated, people aren't going to like it. Like Night Dweller, I want Scavenger, I want to be better than Scavenger. Vesuvius, I do want to close on Vesuvius. My favorite wrestler I created was Vesuvius. I envisioned him as 6'9" and just muscles, just all muscles. And he was superior champ. One of the things that fascinated me with wrestling was the idea of a superior victory. So, superior win is when the referee goes, that guy can't continue, it's done, and awards the decision to the other wrestler. You never see this anymore. So they have like last man standing matches. No. I am talking about that wrestler's done. So I would have Vesuvius just beat guys senseless. He would come out and just beat them to a pulp, to the point where the referee would go, you win, please stop. No pinning. He would never try to pin anybody. And he just hit his finisher over and over and over and over until the referee would be like, that's it, you're done. And so I created a superior belt, which was for him, which was the idea that, if you're going to beat him, you've got to knock him out. This is the only way to beat him. And that was my favorite title I ever created. And he was my favorite wrestler I ever created, because it was just the idea that he'll just beat you until you stop moving. He doesn't care about pinning you. That's not his job. His job is to just make sure you stop moving. And when that's happened and the referee raises his arm, he'll leave. Maybe. Because even after he'd get the superior decision, sometimes he'd still, hold up his title and then just keep kicking the guy while he's down. Yeah. And again, I think that's a gimmick that could work for, say, Lance Archer. That kind of guy, right? I think that could absolutely work in real wrestling. I don't think that'll ever be a thing, but I always found it really impressive, like a superior victory. Oh, that sounds fantastic. And so the superior title was born, and it's one of my favorite things that wrestling doesn't do anymore. I guess it's because in this day and age, people are like, oh, they buried that guy. Well, no, they made this guy. So Vesuvius was made on that. And again, it was jobbers in the beginning, but eventually he had a superior victory against Scavenger. Eventually, Scavenger turned heel, joined Vesuvius, and the two of them were a fantastic tag team. But anyways, there you go. Thanks for coming on this journey. I figured that I would wear my Travel Partners for Life t-shirt. Yvonne and I wear this whenever we travel, so that if we lose each other in the airport, people can find us. But yeah, I figured, why not? I'm going to be talking like I'm crazy anyways. Why not wear a t-shirt that makes me look crazy too? But all right, thank you guys so much for all your support as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And so, yeah, if I wasn't the hockey guy, I might have become the wrestling guy, but I don't know that there's enough there for me to do daily videos on wrestling. I don't know there's enough there. But that's how I wrote it. That's how I saw it. And it is hard when you're running a company not to go, I should be the title holder. So I totally get why Vince McMahon held the WWE title. I totally understand why Eric Bischoff went, man, I want to go hang out with the guys and be a heel with them. Because you would feel that way. I totally get that. But Tony Khan needs to not. Just no. Please no. For the love of everything that's holy, please don't make yourself the David Arquette of promoters. All right, that being said, thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.